To hell with the date on your birth certificate. Let's talk about what we have in common across generations. Life, sex, and tech at any age. Welcome to Age Blind with Nancy Shenker.
Hey, boys and girls, welcome back to Age Blind, where the date on your birth certificate is meaningless. And this month, April, we're focusing on what I'm calling spring cleaning, which is cleaning up all aspects of your life and your work just so you become a better person and your environment becomes better. So spring cleaning is not just getting your Swiffer or your sponge or your toilet brush and folding your laundry. It's really about looking at all aspects of your life, yourself, the people in your life, your work environment, and then figuring out ways that you can clean it up just to allow more brain space in your head and more love in your heart to be a better person. So with that as an introduction, let's talk about today's workplace. So we're living in a world where bad behavior, bullying, and disrespect are really common, sadly. And a recent study showed that 30%, as much as 33% of the reasons why people leave jobs is related to either a toxic work environment or a toxic boss. So I'm so thrilled and honored to have today's guest on, who I found kind of by accident. I was searching for another group related to loneliness and belonging, and I found her company's website, which is called KindR. What better name than that? So Shereen Eltobgy is the chief of belief and co-lead for KindR Workplaces. So what does that mean? It means in her job, she coaches leaders how to be kinder, how to be more effective and be more successful while they're still being kind to themselves and others. Imagine that. We're living in a world with a lot of meanness. It was a great article in The Atlantic a couple of years ago about how America is becoming meaner. We see stuff on reality TV, and even our government officials are just doing and saying mean things. So this is a great opportunity to spring clean your soul. So welcome, Shereen, who's coming to us from Egypt, where she lives.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I'm really, really honored to be here and to be in this conversation with you and chatting with your viewers. And yeah, I spend about 6 months out of the year living in some sort of exotic place and experiencing kindness and cultures and different types of ways people are living with soul. And then the other 6 months, I'm typically in the United States with my husband. Yeah. So
Oh,
we kind of do the work travel thing.
awesome. And you used to work at Zappos, which was one of the first companies to really talk about happiness and joy and happy leadership. I mean, it didn't end well, but it was one of the first companies to really build happiness into its culture and have the CEO be the face of the organization. So tell us a little bit about your experience working at Zappos and what it was
Yeah.
like to be in an
Yeah.
environment that didn't
Yeah.
just sell shoes, but lived, ate, and breathed
Absolutely.
kindness.
Absolutely. So I worked with Delivering Happiness, which was co-founded by Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos.com. And we were sort of the culture coach salting company that he created out of the Zappos experience that had been so successful. And the intention was, when he wrote the book, Delivering Happiness, A Path to Profits, Passion, and Purpose, was for him to share the secrets that he had woven into the company culture based on his own experiences from having sold a company when he was young, where he started to feel disillusioned towards the end, and the culture was not alive, it wasn't kind, it wasn't what he would have wanted to have created if he were to start over again. So when he went to Zappos, he created this incredibly values-based, purpose-driven organization that was fueled by the science of happiness and kindness, where people could really be themselves and were encouraged to be happy first. And then from that place, he really got how when the employees were happier and the employees were kinder, that would naturally ripple out to the customers. And it created what became known in the marketplace as the Zappos wow customer experience. And the fact that everybody would talk about that as a culture. And then the last note around that is it became so popular as a model for a thriving, flourishing culture where people were put first that it became one of the top business case studies that they studied at Harvard and MIT around creating a thriving business culture. So it was
That's
great.
great. And the sad reality, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, there are people in this world who are givers, who do really care about the happiness of others, who may, in and of themselves, not be happy. And what was really sad is it seemed like when he left the company and he lost that sense of purpose, he went into a downward spiral. So I think there's certainly a lesson that we can learn from that. And as you know, Shereen, I write a regular column for a magazine called Street Fight, and it's called Brands with Soul. And this month, my brand with soul is KindR, because
Oh.
you are trying to infuse that into other company cultures. But I think the really important thing, which you pointed out when we were going over our questions for today, is you do need to really start with yourself. Because if you're not happy and you're not kind to yourself, it's going to be really, really hard to be kind to others. So just very simply, how do you define kindness? Since this is your job and it's what you do day in and day out, if someone said kindness, like that's just way too woo-woo, what does that really mean? What would you say? I mean, just think about, your badass bosses or people who are really more concerned with profits than with passion. How do you convince them that kindness does really lead to better business?
Yeah. So let's start first with defining, like a little bit of defining around kindness, and then we'll ping pong some ideas around how it can really benefit a business. Because one of the things that I think people, when we talk to them about happiness, everybody kind of understood that the human experience is one where we all want to pursue happiness, but we're challenged with it, as you mentioned, because our brain sometimes is not our friend. And we're wired to search and pursue happiness and desire it, but our brain is also wired to look for the negative, to go to fight, flight, to react sometimes in fear. So we as human beings have this like really strong kind of two things pulling at us. When it comes to kindness, what I really loved about the bridge from going from delivering happiness to kindness is that kindness is something that everybody can understand. I want to start by saying one thing is that kindness is not niceness. So that's an immediate like distinction and
Very
mistake people
true.
make,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, right? Because people think, oh, well, kindness means I should be really nice and I should be maybe I don't say anything. So I want to start that by saying that kindness, number one, is defined by compassion in action with the emphasis and the underscore under action. It's that willingness to go from sympathy, which is I see someone, and Brene Brown had a great distinction between sympathy and empathy, where I see that somebody is maybe hurt or suffering or in need. And I'm just like, okay, well, I see that, I'm sorry you feel that way and good luck to you. And then there was empathy where you really feel with, and you're not looking at the person, but you're really with them. You're with them in it. You relate to it. You tell them, hey, I've been through this too. And you're really helping them show you that your heart is with their heart. And when you talk about bringing the soul back in business or the soul back in leadership, it starts with opening the heart, right? Kindness is the next step from sympathy to empathy to an action of kindness. It's when you decide, not randomly, but intentionally, repeatedly, to do something about it, to offer the help before it's asked, to step in and send something to someone that would help them, to step into a gesture where someone can really see, hear, or feel that they're cared for.
So let
So
me
that's
give
the
a very
first one.
specific
Yeah.
example of that where I'm
Yeah.
really working at practicing empathy and kindness because I came out of a corporate culture. You and I talked about this, Shereen. In the
Totally.
80s, there
Mhm.
was no distinction between niceness and kindness and results. Like the
Yeah.
whole gestalt in the 80s was you have to be mean, you have to manage by fear, and that is how you get the best results out of people. And there are many leaders who still operate with that philosophy.
Absolutely.
So, great example. I have a associate who is still in college and he works on my stuff. And Kyle, my producer, my podcast producer, is out of town this week at a podcast conference. So they are both doing things that are really critical to their professional development. Is it inconvenient for me? Hell yeah. Do I say to them, well, and how am I going to get my work done? Because that would only lead to their stress level. So the reality is, yes, it's causing a glitch in my business operations, but I had to switch my thinking to say, well, if it was me going to a conference or if it was me having midterms, would I want my boss adding to my stress level by throwing more work at me? So the action
I
in
love
the case of Ook, well, first of all, I said to Kyle, Ook is your backup this week. So basically, I gave him another resource to help him get his job done. And then I said to Ook,
Nice.
I know you have midterms. I know this is a busy week for you. When is most convenient for you to have this meeting? So it's putting myself and my business needs slightly behind somebody else's. Will the work still get done? Absolutely. Will it get done on
Exactly.
my timeline? Maybe not, but will I end up with two independent contractors who want to keep working for me? I sure as hell hope so. So that's a good
Absolutely.
example of kindness in action. And the old Nancy, I always think it's creepy when I talk about myself in third person.
The farmer, Nancy.
Right. The former Nancy, because of the environment in which I was operating, would have been a bitch, to be perfectly blunt, because that was my frame of reference. That's what I was seeing around me. So now I'm going to ask you a very specific and provocative question. Let's say you walked into an environment with a guy who was a hard driving business leader, had always been delivering great results for his company, using that command control fear-based model. How do you
Mhm.
flip them to become a kinder leader, but still effective without compromising business results?
Yeah. Well, I love that you asked that question. And the good news for you around your example with Kyle and his colleague is that all the stats and all the data are now available, and they're on the side of the action that you took. So while the action may not happen in the same timeline, right? We can prove through all kinds of surveys and measurements and tools that you will have a better result. You will have people who are working with you for you with purpose and passion. They're more likely to be more productive, so they'll get a better quality product out. They'll be more creative, more innovative. So we know that the stats are there. So when I go to those types of leaders, and I've worked with leaders and organizations in over 20 countries around the world with delivering happiness, and now with KindR starting to do that here as well. We go in with the stats and the data. Look, what are companies suffering from right now? Well, they've got, well-being is down. Is productivity is not exactly where they want it because people are burnt out, or they're not in a creative or innovative mode, or they're leaving. So retention is not where people want it. Turnover, there's so many problems. And we know that people who work for individuals, leaders, and organizations that are values-based, purpose-driven, and treat them with kindness and respect and make them feel valued, all of their statistics in terms of productivity, in terms of those bottom line results that people are looking for, sales, going to market faster, competing and better, collaborating internally to compete externally better, everything. We've got so many, I would say, measurements that show that.
And
So I
especially
first,
if you have a retail business or a restaurant business. I just came back from
absolutely.
nightclub and bar. And
Mhm,
so, or I'm sorry, not nightclub and bar. It's now called, I just came back from the bar and restaurant show. And it was so
mhm,
interesting to me that although a lot of the trade show floor was filled with new technologies and AI and robotics and digital games, there were an equal number of companies talking about staff training and
mm,
intergenerational collaboration because
mm,
um, I would say Kane's Chicken Fingers is a good example of a multi location restaurant brand that does breathe happiness into its culture. And the
mhm.
results prove that out. And I've met people who work there, and whether they're like making fries or making management decisions, there's a sense of they exude joy. And that
Yeah,
ultimately translates into consumer reviews on Yelp, which
and
translates into
loyalty.
new business. That if
Yeah.
I once heard about a company that allowed its employees to call in a bad mood, because if you're in a
Mhm.
pissy mood, you're not going to be particularly nice to that person who complains about their chicken
Mhm.
sandwich.
Right, especially if you're customer facing, right? So they it creates internal loyalty. You become more loyal to your managers, more loyal to your company, and that is, like you said, exudes out, and customers are treated better. NPS scores for your people that are on that side of the business, they skyrocket. Patient in the healthcare industry, patient experience scores, they go through the roof. We worked with a big healthcare system in New York, and some of those patient experience scores went from, the 40s and 50s and 60s all the way up into the 90s. From training people, it's not just the training of the employees, right? It's the training of the employees, but also empowering the management to allow that those new behaviors to flourish so that the people can truly be in a new environment where they get to behave differently and are treated differently. And then the last thing, like I'll share about that example specifically that I learned from Zappos and from Tony was, he gave a lot of leeway. So one of the ways in which he was kind is that he really believed in the creative capacity of the individual, that everybody's smart and everybody knows what to do if they're just given the right opportunity to do the right thing.
Yeah, the other company today that's really good at that was founded by one of my college dorm mates. Ari Zingerman and Paul Saginaw founded Zingerman's, and they
Mm.
founded the company on socialist principles. And it's very different from servant leadership. I've never really liked that term because it needs to be a collaboration. Like nobody's anybody's servant. And I love what you just said about everybody bringing a talent into the workspace. And I have an amazing team right now. Props to Ook and Tanner and Kyle and Corbin, because they're genuinely nice, kind people. And we, even though we're 40 years apart in age, it's proof positive of age blind, is we just have respect for each other and what each of us knows. So,
Mhm.
I think that's a really key thing too, is as you're hiring, look to
Yeah.
build a team where people genuinely are nice, they like each other, not like in popularity. And as you said before, nice is different from kind. I may not want to
Yeah.
hang out at happy hour with somebody, but that doesn't mean that I can't respect them for the talent that they bring to the table.
Yeah, and we do find that when people start to treat others with kindness, and even when they observe an act of kindness between other people, they actually do start to, something does happen inside of our hearts and our nervous system, and they actually do start to like those people more. So even if you start out in an environment where there's people that you think you wouldn't like, it's interesting to see that over time, as we take measurements of the connections that are created in the workplace, or even from the employee out to the customers, if they're in an environment with repeat, clients, that starts to grow and boost. And that goes directly towards solving one of the problems that we know exists today, even from that article you mentioned in the Atlantic, around the loneliness that people are feeling in
Right.
organizations, but also in life. And so kindness equals connection, and a loving connection at times.
Yeah, so important. I remember my very first job out of college. There was a woman who was very quiet. She was kind of odd. We were young. We didn't really think or know how to reach out to her. I mean, it's really a sad story. And one
Mhm.
weekend she went home and drank a bottle of Drano and killed
Oh,
herself. And
oh.
it was a very powerful moment for me as a 22-year-old in my first job. And I realized that I should say hello to everybody that I work with. I should, especially when I got into a leadership position, even something as simple as walking the halls, stopping in, saying
Mhm.
hello to people, not interrupting
Mhm.
their work, or asking, what are you working on? What are you excited about today? Can
Mhm.
really change somebody's entire life, because,
Mhm.
a
I
lot
love
of
it.
leaders forget that they are very meaningful to the people who work for them beyond just a paycheck.
Exactly, a very large awake, emotional wake.
Yeah, I worked for a major money center bank and was so loyal. And even though it was not a particularly kind culture, I hung in. And at the end of all of it, we worked like dogs. We worked with reduced staff sizes. We didn't even get what they used to call war pay or a bonus
Mm,
or a party for sticking around. And that
mm,
was a signal to me that it was time to move on. So that actually brings us to a couple of closing points. If you are in a culture that is just fundamentally a mean culture, command and
mhm,
control, they're forcing you to come to the office, even though it's, a long commute and it doesn't work with your lifestyle. Would you
mhm.
say that person, I mean, I guess it depends on where they fall in the corporate food chain, but, do you think they should try to change the culture or look for another job?
Mm. I love that question. People ask it all the time, and I think every person comes. It's such a blend of each person's individual capacity. I've worked with organizations and teams and individuals that I coach because I do a lot of individual coaching for leaders from management all the way up. And part of it is some people are just that kind of personality that says, you know what, I'm gonna grow myself and I'm a change maker. I'm the one who's gonna go in, and even if I can't change the culture, I'm going to be more kind. So we talked about kindness in action as being, a core definition of kindness where you can do something every day. There's also the idea of being generous of spirit, like you had been mentioning here a moment ago. And that is the practice of giving of our time, our attention, our patience, our encouragement, even when it's not convenient, even when it's not necessarily popular around us. We do know that people join sometimes good organizations, but they leave really bad managers. And we do know that that can have a terrible impact. But we also see from research that there are times when people start to change their behaviors and there can be a grassroots movement that can shift and create subcultures in an organization. So there may be some toxicity over here, but maybe we're able to create something special here. And through our generosity of spirit, where we're catching people doing things right instead of doing things wrong and criticizing, where we're complimenting people sincerely, like you mentioned, and we're walking down the hall and we're saying thank you with heart, and we really are caring, we're giving people the benefit of the doubt. No good deed goes unpunished, right? Like they say. So the good deeds will sometimes roll out. But at the end of the day, people have to also take care of themselves. I always believe that kindness, happiness, it starts with myself. And if the world around me is too toxic and I'm not making any headway, I have to remember that I have to begin with myself. And there has to be a way in which I'm kind to myself and I'm tending to relationship number one, which is the one with me.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up because I was in one of my last corporate jobs. I was working for the quintessential bully. It was the only time I
Mm,
almost cried in the workplace because he
mm,
publicly humiliated me in front of my peers. He loved bringing other people into the office to watch him
mm,
chastise me. And I,
mm,
was known as a high performer. I got great performance reviews. I got great had a great salary, but it was obviously something that was within him. He was an unhappy
mhm,
person. I once got to see him with his little son, and he was
mm,
abusive to his son.
mm.
So I did
Yeah.
one of the ballsiest things I ever did in my career, and I'm not going
Mhm,
to recommend that you do it if you work for a big company unless you think it could potentially end well, or you have enough money in the bank that if you get fired on the spot, you can still survive. So I went into a meeting. I met with him. He was my boss's boss. And I said, I'd like to give you some feedback. Is that okay? And he said, yes. And I said, when you do this, and I gave him specific examples, I said, I become a lot less productive. I shut
yeah,
down. I go back to
exactly.
my office. I'm not in the mood to work. So it's ultimately affecting my creativity, my productivity. So can we agree that if you have feedback to give me, that you give it to me one-on-one in private, and we focus on the work product and not on my personality attributes. And I've
Yeah,
never seen a grown man looking so nervous in my life
I
because
love
I
it.
called him out on his bad behavior. Now, did
Yeah,
he change as a leader? Maybe, I don't know. But I would like to think that conversation, I mean, I sure remember it because I kind of closed with, if I'm really not doing a good job and we're never going to be able to fix this, let's call HR right now and write me a severance package. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting there thinking, oh, I hope he doesn't say yes to that. But I was prepared. Like, it's like, all right, if I get
You
fired because
you had
he's,
a backup.
you know,
Yeah, you had a backup plan, but also, and even it's hard to know if someone's going to change with everyone, but at least he changed with you, and that's the important thing. And like you said, it was a risk; it could have gone either way. I worked with one of the biggest software companies before I came into this field of culture, coach consulting, and coaching. And I was in sales also, like you, in male dominated, industry in the 90s and the early 2000s, and walked away. The people were polite, and my direct managers were certainly wonderful, but the very top level executive leadership basically wanted us to do things and say things that were unethical practices at the time. And so I had to stand up for that. That was for me, that hit a boundary and a line where there was a no negotiation for me. And I just walked away. And they said, you're not gonna leave this company. We know how much money you make. I said, oh, watch me. So, I think that's why it depends on the situation and the person. But I love what you did. I think it's brave, it's courageous. It's what we have to do today. It's what a lot of people are starting to stand up and do. And the thing is, organizations and teams like the KindR Foundation, we have the tools, we have the data to go to HR or to leadership if they come and they're looking for solutions and saying, we've got a handful of managers or leaders and their behavior is a little bit toxic, or that's what we're being told, or people are leaving. We have good people. We're a good company, but they're leaving. Some of our managers, we can come in and help heal and sort of turn that around, because
yeah. And that
almost
is,
everybody is trainable and coachable.
yeah. And that's changed a lot since I worked in the corporate world, which is a good thing. Because I remember my last job, which was, 22 years ago, there was somebody who was working for me who had a problem with me, and it was a legitimate problem. And I was
Mhm.
going through a lot of stuff in my personal life. I was probably a mean, impatient leader. I own that. But instead of coming to me and having the conversation like the one I had with my boss's boss, which is a very scary conversation, she was
Absolutely.
complaining to other people. And then I caught
No.
wind of it. And so I asked the head of HR if she would intervene and have like a mediation session between the two of us. And she refused because she said it would be violating a confidence, which was really
Mm,
clear to me that she really didn't want to fix the problem. She just wanted to stir the pot. So I
mm.
got somebody else in the company to give me permission. We sat down. We had a really, really frank, wonderful conversation. I learned what I needed to do differently as a leader. And now she and I are really close friends. So,
Mhm.
and we've worked together since, and it's been splendid. So, I do think that HR has a responsibility to listen to all sides of the equation and
Mhm.
to not only coach the person who's seen as the problem leader, but also to bring their team together so that there's none of that gossiping or, you know,
Exactly. No backbiting, no gossiping. And that's sort of where the kindness piece comes in. And again, like you're a perfect example. Then that sometimes people would say, well, the nice thing would be to not say anything, but that does nobody that's a disservice to everyone. That's avoidant behavior. Avoidant behavior is not ultimately kind. It's not ultimately generous. It's not ultimately for the greater good of all of us. And so it does take courage to be truly, to adopt a truly lovingly kind attitude and to step forward and to be able to move through the discomfort. Can we be, comfortable in being uncomfortable? And that's part of it, because if we can move through that initial discomfort, like you saw with she's now your friend, and that's in all relationships, not just at work, right? We can often then go into a deeper, better
yes, and we
relationship than we
tell
ever
that
had.
story all the time to other women leaders and
Hmm.
say, this is a classic case where she thought the solution was gossip. I thought the solution was just leaning on her harder and being more of a badass boss. And the right answer was that the results were so much better when we were
Exactly.
just kind to each other. Not necessarily nice, because as you said, at the
Right.
end of the day, businesses are still about results. So
Absolutely.
you can't go too far to the other extreme where, the business is in the toilet, but everybody's singing, kumbaya and
Somebody.
loving
Yeah.
each other. There's got to be that happy medium. And you also have to love success and say, we're doing this as a
Hmm.
team. And, I gave the example of Kane's Chicken Fingers. He took his entire senior leadership team to Cancun because he has very ambitious goals for the company. And he wanted them to feel like they were part of delivering against the goal. And what better than a
Mhm.
Caribbean vacation to get somebody, and not every company can afford that, but even something as simple as an email or a note saying, you did a great job this month. We didn't hit our goal, but I know everybody did their best, can go such a long way, as opposed to, you idiots, we're off by 20%. What are we going to do about it?
I love it. And that's an example of another way we define kindness, which is that very deep presence. It's a level of self-awareness and awareness of others and being very present to really see what's happening and to be able to, in that moment, pause and either offer something positive or meet people where they're at, or listen to them with acceptance and no judgment. So, great leaders or managers, and one of the things that they are really cultivating now, I think good ones are really cultivating this, is especially in a world with so many distractions and everything moving so fast and everybody being so burnt out and social media, and there's just so much noise, right? Is when you meet someone who is truly able to give you a moment of deep presence and understanding. They may not agree with you, but they're present, they're really there, or they can stop for a whole team and say, hey, here's what the results are. I know this quarter is not going great, but here's what everybody's done, and here's what we're going to do next. And really have that positive ability to rally people, but to be super present, I think, and guide people without judgment is truly a gift.
I love that. So, Shereen, if people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way to reach you? Because after hearing this, every business leader, small or big company with multiple locations, should want to be a little bit kinder, either as a human or as an organization. So, where would they find you?
Well, thank you, first of all. I really appreciate that. And you can find me multiple ways. On LinkedIn, it would be Shereen, SHEREENH Eltobgy, ELTOBGY. At the KindR Foundation, you can reach me at Shereen, SHEREEN, at BBE, KindR, KINDR, not ER, but R.org. And also for the younger managers and leaders out there, you can find me on Instagram at Shereen She,
Well, now
SHE, and I'll give them
we
all
need
to
to
you.
be age blind. I'm on Instagram. I'm on
Exactly. I'm on
Instagram as
Instagram.
much as I'm on LinkedIn. So,
Yes.
it's an
Oh,
age
great.
agnostic platform. So
I
let's
love it. I love it. So I will say that I'm not as active on Instagram, but that's changing. I'm on it, but I'm going to get a lot more active just like you are. You've inspired me, Nancy, to do
And,
that.
and
So
that's actually a great segue, Shereen. Thank you so much. You're an amazing guest.
thank
So,
you.
as you go about your day, first and foremost, be kind to yourself. Take some time to think about what you need to do to make yourself a happier person. It's something that I've worked on really, really long and hard. And I have my bad days, but I always try to look for that silver lining in the cloud. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to random strangers, like even just smiling at the person at the takeout window or the cashier at the supermarket. You'll see how their entire body language shifts when you're patient, when you're kind, when you lead with a smile. I know that sounds
Absolutely.
really trite. And because this is age blind and it's something that is near and dear to my heart, never make assumptions at all about
Yep.
anybody based on their age or their stage. Um, as a
Absolutely.
69-year-old woman, I'm often faced with people who assume that I don't understand technology because I'm old, or that I can't work in marketing anymore because I'm old, or conversely, sometimes we don't hire people because we say, oh, they're young and inexperienced. So my youngest team member is, as I said, more than 40 years younger than I am, and he can do things that I have no clue how to do. So
I love
being
it.
age blind is a way to be kind as we head into the second quarter of 2024. So 2025.
I love it. It's a way to be kind and it's a way to thrive and flourish. It's proven that people
Exactly.
like you and I who are age blind, we're healthier, we're happier, and we're really living, loving, and leading from a heart-centered, fuller place. Also want to say if any of your viewers contact me, I'll be happy to give them 5 tools that they can use for themselves for, being kinder to me, yourself, and 5 tools for your teams or other relationships in your life. So 5 tools and practices that you could do to create a kinder, happier we as well.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. And you
happy
could
to do that
kind to
for your
me
people.
by going to nancyaf.com. That's F as in fearless, as in fact-based, as in flawed, like all of us. So nancyaf.com and subscribe. You'll be added to my newsletter, which I'm planning on debuting this month, and you'll get some bonus content throughout the year. So remember, everybody, be kind, be age blind, and peace out.
Yes.